Hello, everyone, and we are about to begin the construction of our introductory paragraph to our research paper. The opening paragraph is so important when it comes to any type of essay because you really want to capture your reader's attention right from the very start. I'd like to begin by explaining how an introductory paragraph is basically like an inverted pyramid. You're going to start with some kind of general statement up here and become narrower and more narrow as you get to the last line. The last line or the last sentence of your intro should be your thesis statement. That's what you're building towards. That's the climax, that's the crescendo, and that's what you want to lead your reader to grasp. Okay, so you want to start general and then move down more and more narrow until you ultimately get to that last sentence, which will be your thesis statement. Sorry for the mess over there. Consider that your thesis statement is what you're building towards, and you don't want to start with it, because if you start with it, where do you go from there? If you talk about what you're going to be examining in Robert Frost's poetry or Edna St. Vincent Millay right away, you're going to lose your reader. And so we want to build toward that. So the question becomes, how does one start? Well, your opening paragraph will include these 4 items: a captivating opening sentence, a bridge from your opening sentence to the literature. You will be naming your author and the 3 titles of poems, building towards this final thesis statement, and these might be combined within the same sentence at times. So let's take the first one. What do you mean by a captivating opening sentence? If you meet someone for the first time and you come up to them with a very boring introductory line, like, do you come here often? Do you think that person is going to want to stick around and hear more about you? Probably not. And so if you open up your essay with Walt Whitman was born in West Hills, Long Island, and blah, 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 nobody's going to care. It's pretty dull. Same thing as if you start immediately with your thesis statement and go right to the literature. It's too boring. You have a couple of options. You can start with a question. You could start with a famous quote if you want. You can start with a statistic. You could start with a general observation about your theme. So what do we mean by that? For example, if you're addressing some aspect of isolation in your thesis statement with regard to somebody's poetry, make some comment or observation about loneliness, about what it feels like to be alienated. Here are some samples. In a paper about transformation, you could begin with the general comment that everything in nature undergoes change. If your paper is about finding meaning through love, you might start with the statistic. According to statistics, 1 out of every 3 marriages ends in divorce. This leads one to question whether or not there really is such a thing as true love. Let's say your paper is about brotherhood. You could begin with a question. Why do so many people enjoy being part of a team? And then you would elaborate on that, right? And if your paper is about rediscovering childhood innocence, you could start with the general observation, often in this world of complexity, the small joys in life are overlooked. So you have a couple of different ways. I didn't illustrate any of them using a famous quote, but if you'd like to use a famous quote, for example, John F. Kennedy once said, and then you would deliver the quote, the only thing I would caution you on is the fact that John F. Kennedy would have to be then on your works cited page when it comes time to doing the works cited page, because you're quoting him from somewhere else. So you could open up with a quote from a famous person if you wish. Once you've got that hook, then you probably need to elaborate a little bit on it, maybe 1 sentence or 2 to explain a little further, maybe, what you were addressing. For example, if you were talking about why does everybody yearn to be part of a team, you could elaborate on that, saying that very often it's much more rewarding for a person to be part of something bigger than himself, to feel part of a tribe, because you can take great pride in the accomplishments of the entire group. So you have to elaborate a little bit before we get to number 2. Number 2 is trying to get you to create a bridge from the opening idea to the works of literature. So you can visualize it like this. You want to go from your quote or your general observation or your statistic. And remember, you've elaborated briefly on this because introductions are all very brief. And somehow you want to get the reader to discuss or to be part of the world of literature. And so in order for that to happen, you can use some of these transitional words to help you to create that bridge. Number 3 is self-explanatory. That's just the titles and the author, and then your thesis statement. If it was approved, then simply repeat it as your last sentence of the paragraph. And if it wasn't, please make whatever necessary changes you have to make it the last sentence. So I've sent you an outline, which I hope will help, and it looks something like this. It's just an opportunity for you to create your thoughts in a slower fashion. So I would start by filling in what my thesis statement was, if it was approved, and if it wasn't, to make the necessary changes. And then once I have my thesis statement here, I'm going to begin to work backwards. Because I don't really want to, give anybody a leg up and start talking about the poetry, I'm going to do a sample with you based on the literary work of Macbeth by Shakespeare. And let's just say that my thesis statement was this. In Macbeth, William Shakespeare incorporates supernatural elements in order to create fear and draw attention to the power of the unknown. So my theme is about the supernatural and how it creates fear and how it is very powerful in terms of that fear. The forces of the unknown are very powerful. So I'm thinking and I'm thinking and I'm thinking about this, about the supernatural. And I'm actually going to begin with both a general observation and a question. So let's say I start off with something like, okay, ghosts, witches, paranormal occurrences. Because those are all from the realm of the supernatural, right? I'll use a colon right here. And I'll just say, why are people drawn to the seemingly inexplicable? Why do we always, want to see this stuff? Why are we intrigued by it? And so I want to elaborate on this idea of the ghosts, the witches, and the paranormal being something that we're drawn to. So I want to elaborate a little bit more. So I might say, there are, even if I think about it, there are more television shows today than ever before. That examine these strange topics. You've got ghost hunters and paranormal searches and all this kind of stuff. So I've just taken my opening line and I've elaborated on it just a wee bit, just one more sentence. But now I have to go from television shows to literature. And so I'm actually going to use a little bit of a contrast here. And I might say, long before television, however, literary authors. So I'm bridging to the literature. literary authors or writers also delved into this realm. Especially playwright William Shakespeare. And that leads me right into my thesis statement, which I might tweak a little bit. In Macbeth, Shakespeare incorporates supernatural elements in order to create fear and draw attention to the power of the unknown. So I started with this general observation about ghosts and witches. I asked a rhetorical question. I elaborated on it briefly, created a bridge to the lit, and then zapped you with my thesis statement. So once I've got it all together, and again, this is just the sample outline, so you can plug in, what you're going to start with. Maybe you're starting with statistics. Maybe you're starting with a famous quote. Maybe you're just going to start the way we did, with the idea of a general observation or a question. The only thing I would caution you against is no personal pronouns at all in formal writing. So you can't use, have you ever felt? So I can't say you, I can't say I can't say me, I can't say we, I can't say our, none of those. It has to be very formal. So we have to keep it as such. Now, the grand pièce de résistance, the final masterpiece, will be a typewritten page just like this. You'll have your last name in the corner with number 1, because that's page 1. The heading is always the same. It's going to be your last name, my name, English 10 honors, and the due date. You don't have to have a title right now, so you can just hold the place if you want with the word title and a question mark. Or if you want to put your title already and you think you might know it, that's fine. But you certainly wouldn't want to put as your title Walt Whitman, Langston Hughes, Edward Arlington Robinson. Okay, no good. And you also don't want to have just the one word, supernatural. You wouldn't want to do something like that. Everything is double spaced. The font is Times New Roman, and the size is 12. And so my outline that I worked on in the prior pages would look like this. Ghosts, witches, paranormal happenings. Why are people so drawn to the seemingly inexplicable? There are more television shows today than ever before that examine these strange topics. Long before television, however, literary authors also delved into this realm, especially playwright William Shakespeare. In Macbeth, now my thesis said William, but I don't need to repeat it, so I'm just going to shorten it to Shakespeare. In Macbeth, Shakespeare incorporates supernatural elements in order to create fear and draw attention to the power of the unknown. Done. Introductions are not long. They're probably about 5 sentences or so, 4 or 5 sentences. They're succinct, but they do the job. They get all of those things done. They begin creatively. They elaborate on the topic briefly. They name the titles of all 3 poems and the author, and they have the thesis statement at the very end. Don't forget your inverted pyramid. Okay? Good luck, and don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions.